Okay, so part one, we're going to begin with our block on transportation security. And like I was referring to before in our casual conversational intro about anybody traveling and how every year, without fail, this time of year, what would you say, millions of people tend to travel more domestically than most calendar windows, including international. And what do you, just we could find the data on this. What do you think most people travel during, say, a time like this, like around major holidays? You think it's mostly air, road, air, surface? Surface means, and I'll talk more about the technicalities, as you could assume. Surface is rail and road, right? So train or car. Obviously, maritime is boat. Most people don't transport in that modality, but nonetheless, a time and a place. What do you think? What do you think is most prevalent as far as use of transportation around this time between surface and air, Isabel?
I'm going to guess surface.
I would tend to agree. Without stats in front of us, I would tend to agree because in this day and age, two things: convenience and distance. Convenience, right? Most people have family they could travel to, but because of a lot of those other predicating factors, right, and variables, many tend to not use air to travel around these times. Packed airports, economics, right? Price gouging, right? For tickets and things like that. And there are other perceptions that it's more dangerous from a safety standpoint to fly than it is to drive or take a train. That's actually false. That's actually false if you look at the stats. It's more dangerous to drive short or long distances around times when there's more volume, right, amongst us, if that makes sense. Does that make sense? Right? It is what it is in that capacity. So there's some positives and negatives from a data perspective, right? Me, unless I was really pressed, you couldn't catch me in an airport around this time. Or a major train station, not me. Although I'm contradicting myself because Friday, right, the day after Thanksgiving, this Friday rather, I paid, not complaining about the money, but I always throw that in there just to be sarcastic. I paid $90 per person to do the, what's the train that you go on? Winter Wonderland train thing? Nobody knows? Yeah, of course not. When you get old like me, you have a kid, you're supposed to remember this stuff. But it's anyway, some train, I don't know where it goes, North Pole? I guess I'm going to the North Pole. And everything's Christmassy, and I get it, okay. So I'm forced to take a train Friday. Well, that's more specialized, compartmentalized, right? But anything can happen. Let's not sugarcoat things, all right? A lot of cars on the road, a lot of trains moving, a lot of planes in the air, cargo coming in and out of jurisdictions via ship and other maritime modalities. A lot going on, not only year-round, but especially around these times. So, part one, transportation security. I'm going to start out, well, first off, let's start out with a fairly generic video intro via a media outlet. It's pretty quick. Stand by.
Another incident in the unfriendly skies overnight. A Delta Airlines flight from Los Angeles to Washington, D.C. had to divert to Oklahoma City when an unruly passenger attacked multiple people on board. And this is just the latest example in a growing trend of violence on airplanes that spiked in recent months.
Now, we see this all the time, unfortunately, which always baffles me in post 9/11 times, how prevalent people behave negatively in more mass populated transportation modalities, such as thousands of feet in the air on a plane, sitting very close to one another. And what do you think? Behavior like that may increase or decrease around holiday seasons? What do you think?
Increase.
Yeah? Why do you say? What are you drinking? That looks interesting.
Honeydew melon, strawberries, flax seeds, chia seeds, ginger, and water. Strawberries.
You're a juicer?
Yes.
Okay.
In response to that, I feel like
Wait, I wasn't done about the juicing. No, I'm kidding. I'm only kidding. Go ahead. I'm teasing.
I'd say be more in kind because there's more people around, out and about, and everyone's emotions are ranging differently. Some
That's right.
have money for holidays.
That's right.
Some don't.
That's right. Right? Holidays, once again, this is more sociological, but, or anthropology, whatever, but running vertically around the holidays, right? Personalities and emotions tend to run in a lot of different directions for a lot of different families, populations, this and that. We get that. Hence, people want to usually be with family and often have to travel to do so. Bottom line, we know that. That's part of the foundation of this, right? And you would think things would be more positive, get better, improve around these times. But like Terry indicated, when you have more of something going on, right, that increases a lot of different things, right? A lot of different variables. Numbers of humans, right? More flights, more cars on the road, right? More trains running, right? And a lot going on. We'll bring up a couple more factors that impact specifically certain types of security for travelers in a little bit, but we'll finish this out and go from there.
And this travel season, the TSA is sending a stern warning to passengers. News Nation correspondent Janelle Ford is live at Atlanta's Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport with a closer look at the TSA's message to travelers. Janelle.
Ruth May, this is just the latest effort to try and get passengers to be deterred from acting a fool on flights. If you take a look closely back here, you can see one of those signs greeting passengers as they enter the TSA checkpoint here. And with holiday travel picking up, they're trying to make sure that everyone gets the message.
It's yet another instance of violence in the now not so friendly skies.
In 15 minutes at 8:28 for the emergency landing, a flight attendant has been assaulted.
A Delta Airlines flight from D.C. to Los Angeles forced to divert to Oklahoma City after a passenger attacked a flight attendant and the air marshal who stepped in to intervene. This video, taken as local law enforcement escorted the passenger off the plane. This case joins a long list of incidents of unruly air travelers since the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic. This year alone, the Federal Aviation Administration has tallied more than 5,500 unruly passenger reports. Nearly 4,000 of them had to do with the mask mandate. Despite prompting the FAA to adopt a zero-tolerance policy towards disruptive passengers. In August, the agency proposed civil fines topping $1 million, and many airlines have suspended alcohol services on flights. Now, just ahead of the busy holiday travel period, warning signs going up at TSA airport checkpoints across the country, reminding passengers passengers that if you threaten, endanger, or harm TSA agents during the screening process, you could face thousands of dollars in fines.
And Ruby Bay, hopefully that's enough to get people not to act up on flights, but, you know, it's a waiting game, we'll have to wait and see.
All right, so I purposely used by 1 year, a dated video to increase the magnitude of what does go on, what has been a cause for things to increase, but including but not limited to some stats that you saw there. So, from a historical perspective, pre 9/11, I would say, as opposed to post 9/11, you had some shenanigans, if you will, issues, incidents occur, right, via various modes of transportation, specifically more mass populated, right, modes, including trains and airplanes, right? Furthermore, pre 9/11, once again, data's not in front of me, but based on experience, research, some other things, although you had your problems here and there, you had some other things that were allowed, things that are now prohibited, that may have played into a decrease in comparison, based on problems, things like that. let me see if you get this. You're a lot younger, so, but I'll try to probe you. There were certain things you could do on planes that you can't do now, before 9/11. And I'm not talking about yell bomb as many times as you want. I'll talk, let's just say habits.
Smoke cigarettes.
Yeah. Before 9/11, you had a lot of people that were able to smoke cigarettes on planes. That calms people down if they're smokers. You had the option to take like a smoking plane. There's smoking sections, domestic and internationally, things like that. Could be one contributor to, within the confines of aviation security. This isn't relegated to aviation security, right? But could be a contributing factor, things like that. Then you had the service of alcohol, which you still have now, right? Was it as controlled pre 9/11? Depends, I guess, on the airline and the behavior of somebody who may be more apt to drink too much. Now, right, luckily we do have, some more stricter guidelines. So after 9/11 occurred, as you can imagine, strictness increased. We've discussed this from a policy standpoint. You've probably experienced that yourself if you have flown at least once post 9/11, all right? We talked a little bit about that in different lectures. But then you have other contributing factors, without naming an abundance of them. One relative to our intro, COVID, right? Create a lot of different challenges, not only for the people that work in transportation hubs, but people like us who, at will, make decisions to travel and do our best, right, to not be, relegated to the rule-breaking column, the violator column. I think most people of reasonable mind try to go with the flow by and large, even though we may not agree in totality with a lot of that is written administratively or in definitive mandates or statutes. It's what it is. Public safety is the paramount factor from a universal standpoint. So I think most people, once again, of reasonable mind, can adjust. So once again, this is not in totality a an additional examination on human behavior. That's always going to be, right, a constant, right? But we're going to understand a lot of the what, where, and how as it applies to part 1 and part 2 after the holiday of all things. Remember, it's not just transportation security. Well, let me update that, right? It's transportation security for counter terrorism, okay? So, starting out here with what we call some pillars. Real simple. Okay? From a technical standpoint, well, it's really not that technical, but from a terminology standpoint and conceptual, just remember, just in case when we go to review, because all subject matter, right, most likely will appear, well, all themes will appear on the final. Well, let's keep in mind, just in case, when we talk about all things from a pillar perspective and modality and or methodology is just how people can achieve an objective, right? When it comes to transportation, as well as the security of it, we're referring to air, maritime. You remember what maritime is, yes? Does everybody remember what maritime is, just in case? Calvin, what's maritime? It's okay. Yeah, no, it's a weird word. Anyone? Anyone? Yes, ma'am? Yeah, sea, water, right? It's a military, derived from the military, okay? Remember, surface. I put ×2 as an indicator. Surface is roadway, i.e. automobile, and rail as well, at least how we're disseminating our curriculum, okay? So then we got something relegated to what's known as, stand by, we'll call them impacting environmental components. Now, we have the modalities of transportation, those pillars, but then in funneling down, these are those environmental components by which different modes of transportation are affected, because they have to be, right? And in that case, we're talking about bridges, right? Tunnels. I specifically put letter C as such because I want to explain that a little bit. Rail distance and jurisdiction. D, official waterways. And E, FAA regulated air traffic. They're all written as such, mainly C, D, and E, specifically, and I'll explain a little bit why I did so, okay? So obviously, when it applies to surface, right, bridges and tunnels, right, are man-made structures in which numbers play a big deal. So does the man-made aspect. And that's how they evaluate risk. What am I really getting at here? Hopefully for you, you don't take a bridge to come to school. Does anybody take a bridge to come to school? Okay. But you've taken bridges, right? Everybody's been over bridges. For the last 30 years, literally, I've taken a bridge every day, whether it was school or work. I don't know if you remember, during one particular lecture, I mentioned that. And I mentioned something that has to do with a risk factor, just for me, or anybody that would have to do so. And it increases an individual's risk factor when traveling, when you do things like that, as you can imagine. Why so? Well, if you look at a bridge and or a tunnel, but especially a bridge, we know it's man-made, right? Combined with millions, right, of vehicles of all different sizes and weights that go over that bridge. Number one, safety issues, right? A bridge goes up in year one. We can only hope that structurally, right, it's up to par in every way that we would want it to be, right? We don't want it to be like one of those crazy movies, man, right? When you see things just like collapse and this, right? Just like maniacal. Scary stuff. There are bridges that actually move. Well, it's only going to move if a certain amount of vehicles are on it, right? Here's the other thing. Do you think people with bad intentions know how long a bridge has, one, been in existence, two, how many cars and trucks go over that thing per day, and three, if there's any improprieties going on with that bridge? Yeah, because a lot of people with bad intentions and or a lot of people with bad intentions are associated with people that are actually really smart. They're called engineers, right? They design these things that we travel over, through, and by way of. Hence, right, the crossroads between bad intentions and what's already in existence. Tunnels, without beating a dead horse, structural factors apply. Maybe even riskier if you think about it. What do we know about a bridge? You're up in the air. And I'm afraid of heights as it is. I purposely never took like a fireman's test because I can climb a ladder, but I'm not cool with all that heights and smoke and shit. Let somebody else, you fucking do it. You do. You know what I mean? It's not my thing. You want me to break a fucking door in? Okay. No problem. Want me to save your life? Yeah, okay. I'm not gonna run a 4.40, but I'll get there. But think of how high you are when you're in that vehicle going over a bridge. And then think of how confined you are, conversely, when you go through a tunnel, right? I'm a little claustrophobic. I think a majority of that occurred from working in corrections. Mass populations, sometimes elevators, stairwell, just a lot of different contributing factors. I can still function as a human, but everybody has their things, right? So A and B could be very convenient for us as they are, but can be very unforgiving from a safety when we're talking about transportation perspective, and then furthermore, counterterrorism, right? Think about that. Would it take a lot to impact the structural well-being of any bridge? No, it really wouldn't. It wouldn't. Could you do damage, most likely, with one truck filled with, God forbid, proper resources as they saw fit? The bad people with bad intentions? Sure. You know? Things like that. Could you ensure that something could also run into it without being on it? Yeah, sure. And what does that do to like a bridge or a tunnel? And we're gonna kind of like piggyback off of that for rail as well. What is that? What did I just say? What does that do? What did I say? I'm sorry.
If you ran into it.
No, sorry. I don't know why I just had a brain fart. Nonetheless, from a societal perspective, right? Overall increases risk factors because you can control your vehicle to an extent. Like if you're flying, like a lot of these travelers, are you in control? You're in control of your behavior, right? But are you in control? No. We're relying on the guy up in the cockpit who hopefully wasn't drinking, right, at the airport bar, as well as other factors like weather, technological, right, engine related, right, all that stuff. We often put our lives in the hands of others, whether we're realizing it or not. It's a little more philosophical than I want to get, but nonetheless, all-encompassing. Rail, specifically distance and jurisdiction. Anybody know well, I'll give you a hint. I'm talking risk factors here. Distance/jurisdiction. How might those concepts impact any of us, right, if we were to opt to take a train anywhere, short or long distance? Hint, hint. Anyone? Who takes the LIRR from the cult of Long Island that you are? Who takes the LIRR at all? Any? Here and there? Okay, you've done it, right? In some aspects, you'd be silly not to sometimes. But trains are computerized. Could something happen, right, from a logistical and operational standpoint? All the time. Happens all the time. Now, the worst thing that could happen, right, is a derailment, essentially, right? Like an all-out derailment. I've seen one derailment in my career, and it's mind-blowing, and I would never want to see it again. And you see them on the news, and you understand. I don't think all of us understand, I didn't until I saw one, the true levity of that. Because you're relying on, right, a moving modality relegated to transporting humans or cargo, right, to hopefully maintain its presence on these two long metal, right, with electricity conducted through them, rails on man-made tracks. Okay. If you think about it over and over again, it's a little unforgiving, very challenging. Pretty simple though. Risk increases with something like a train when what? You have a longer distance to go. Because what? Are you going to go the same speed necessarily in a longer distance than you would in a short? Probably not. They have a specialized train that goes from New York City or Newark, Penn Station, to Washington, D.C., called the Acela train. You can't even hear it if it passes by you. You know how many people I had to physically grab by the arm, almost like assaulting them, and yank them away while on a train platform because their back was too close to where an Acela train would pull up, because all you hear is zzz. You never experienced this? You ever see this? It's insane. And somebody supervising me did it to me because I was too close one time. Yeah, as they're passing, you know? Nonetheless, trains going a longer distance may tend to go a little faster as it applies to like a shorter distance, right? Because they're monitored federally by, well, state-wise Department of Transportation, and then federally. Jurisdiction, what the hell am I talking about? It also has to do with distance, but what jurisdictions do we have? Well, if you think about it, urban, suburban, and rural. Well, especially with rail, it often encounters 2 or more of those jurisdictions. Sometimes environmental factors could impact, right, said modality based on those jurisdictions, right? I don't have the data in front of me, but more trains may derail in one or more of those jurisdictions than the other. More importantly, though, from a counterterrorism perspective, history has shown that if a transportation attack, right, was to occur, the planning that goes into that, these components, these elements that we're discussing about, are directly related to a lot of the strategy, right, from a threat standpoint. Hence, the risk factors from a counterterrorism perspective are always at the forefront, all right? D&E, real quick, official waterways, right? Those are regulated, federally and state and federally regulated domains, if you will, within that modality, i.e. a body of water in which mass populations that are, in fact, or cargo, en route from point A to point B, okay, can only stay within those, right, mandated waterways, and that can often present challenges. FAA regulated air traffic. When we fly, like people like us, right, business or travel, we're boarding planes that are designed, right, to fly at a certain percentage of height, at a certain percentage of speed, and believe it or not, a certain avenue of space. You know that. Why do you think you can publicly access, right? Like if you're a friend of mine, right, role playing, if you're a friend of mine and you say, oh, I'm on a flight this morning. Oh, cool. I'll check it out on, I forgot what the site is. You can literally see the routes. It's another challenge, right? They publicly exhibit air routes, right, for people to see online. And most people who have a vested interest in that, even from a negative connotation, know the deal as it pertains to factors and variables contributing to that too. But it's not like a pilot transporting people like us traveling short or long distance can take any which route. Those are regulated routes. It's a high-risk industry. You've probably heard about that. Air traffic, things like that. We're talking counterterrorism today, but I have no problem from an industrial standpoint. And once again, I don't have the data in front of me, but in the 80s, 90s, and I think part of the 2000s, it may still run the same. This is another unforgiving contributor. Once again, has nothing to do with counterterrorism, but maybe in some ways does from a risk factor in that way where we bridge the gaps. Air traffic controllers, amongst a few other industries outside of transportation, top 3 for suicide rates. It's not music to our ears, right? A lot of challenges. Okay, so now looking at risk as we know it, as the government imposes it, I should say, as we know it, as the government regulates it and mitigates it, and as all other variables are imposed on those factors. We're going to go over a couple things here that probably it's most logical to hone in on what's either a different color or indicating more vital to knowledge. All right, real quick. Examining the risk imposed on what's called the transportation network. Those pillars are the transportation network. By both security policies and terrorist activity is critical to understanding higher level risks, such as those related to national security and the economy, okay? So once again, the pillars that we talked about, air, surface, and maritime, okay, are relegated to what is known as the transportation network, because if you care about one or if you're honing in on one, you got to hone in on all three. Because it's not like only one may have a threat against it, and we only have to worry about that. You get it. It's all universal. Even if a specific plane, train, bridge, tunnel, car, or waterway, or vessel is specifically targeted, right, to be threatened, it still applies because it's all encompassing, okay? The other key is what would be considered a higher level of risk, right? In a loose interpretation, like I said, taking a bridge every day versus maybe not taking a bridge every day. How about this? Waking up and getting in a car every day. Do we increase our own safety risk by just literally getting in a car and turning it on and start driving? Of course. Of course. How about this? A friend of the family, my own personal friend of the family, was, now, once again, we're not talking about pedestrians, but just waking, I mean, from a societal standpoint, just waking up in the morning and leaving your house, you're at risk. A lady in her 60s that I only met her twice, but I'm really good friends with her family. She's no longer with us because a couple months ago, she's just walking around the corner from her house. Retired millionaire, by the way. Worked her ass off her whole life. Has grandkids, step-grandkids, everything across the board, right? Good person. A car going about 70 miles an hour in a 35. Drives off-road, kills her, continues driving, and the car launches into a house and hurt people inside the house. I mean, like, if it can happen, it will happen, right? And then when you throw these other things in, like people with really bad intentions, it's daunting. It's daunting, okay? So this transportation network includes what's called a framework, right? People like you in the future, right, that have certain skill sets and capabilities to kind of piece things together to figure out how to evaluate risk properly, right? How do you evaluate risk as it pertains to this transportation network, all things coming, going, that involve us, right? Data and intelligence as it applies to direct targeting by terrorists, and hopefully we have that. We have previous data, but we can't really go by previous data because, I don't know, how many planes have been hijacked in American history? Not a ton, right? As one example. So we have to have good intel, right? Hopefully. That's why that intelligence cycle is never ending. B, what's called collateral damage, right? If targeted and if an act is carried out, such as a bridge or a major transportation hub of any kind, or a tunnel, whatever it is, a pillar, an environmental component, whatever it is, gets impacted, what's the collateral damage? Suppose you Long Islanders, just say, role playing, all came to a consensus and said, you know what? The money's in the city, man. This isn't necessarily true. The money's in the city. We got to work in the city. So guess what? I spent most of my life on Long Island, as many people do in their own jurisdictions. But you know what? A new chapter is going to open because I have to grow. I have to evolve. I have to, right? Do this, do that. Well, guess what? Suppose you needed to take a bridge to get to somewhere, wherever it is, or a major roadway like the LIRR and this and that. Because you know you could jump on 495 and drive it directly into what? The whole way. You could jump on your LIE, sorry, LIRR. You could jump on the LIE and drive it directly where? Huh? Manhattan. All the way, right? Stops, literally. Does it not, right? In Manhattan, a section of Manhattan. So, what happens if a piece of the LIRR is no longer there? Suppose Godzilla comes and fucking takes a bite out of it. Or more realistically, suppose something really catastrophic happens, right? How you getting there? You taking your fucking G5? Private jet? Out of MacArthur? Probably not yet, right? You get where I'm going? Bridge. Structurally discontinued. Railways, structurally discontinued. Waterways, structurally discontinued. That's all it takes. That's one version of collateral damage. The fact that you can no longer get somewhere to now survive, you got a problem. We got a problem. The state has a problem. The country has a problem. That's called collateral damage. The layers, right, in which are impacted. And C, pre- and post-attack security policies. Policies are boring as shit. I will advise, if you're a decent writer, improve on your writing, because if you do have the fortitude one day and skill set, the ability to write or revise a policy is very valuable. But in the meantime, whether that comes to fruition or meets a goal and objective personally, it doesn't matter. We have to abide by certain policies day in and day out, right? And we hope multi-level government's best interest in us from a public safety perspective, that policies are in fact on point by majority as it applies to the evaluation of risk, right? Can they predict for every a-hole that's going to fight somebody on a plane? No, they can't. Because if they could, what would they do? They would red flag all those people who've ever been part of an incident, and they would never be able to fly again. And some people can't ever fly again. They're on a no-fly list indefinitely or forever, whatever. But it's not just that, right? So many different moving parts as it applies to, in writing, what's called a best practice, right? Where does it start for us from a surface standpoint? In a corny way, corny as it applies to something that's ingrained in us, like almost like no shit, Sherlock, like a speed limit. But look at that. We all violate the speed limit. We all do stuff when we're driving we're not supposed to time, but there's patternistic offenders that could care less about our personal safety, right? Or their own. Now, what's in red here, I'm going to read twice. Risk is measured in terms of capacity losses between an origin and a destination. It's actually simple if you break it down. How many times can something screw up based on data, right? And if a loss occurs, what does that mean? What's a loss? Just somebody dying? Not just somebody dying, right? Right? We have human loss, economic loss, emotional, everything that could go into that. But when you're able to, based on loss, previous loss, right? Because what do you think? These people that are directors of risk management and high up policymakers, they're smart, right? But they work off of a formula. So our lives, are pretty much relegated in many cases around mathematical formulas, right? Where they'll say, okay, the probability, right, that could increase risk in this vertical is based on previous loss, right? But it starts really down to where is, right, because we're talking about transportation, from point A to point B, from point A to point Z, right? Where are we talking about? Jurisdiction and distance, right? I applied it to one, right, environmental component before, but it truly does, right? The overall risk of something happening to us that could impact our safety, or number two, intentionally by way of the perpetrator, from a terrorist perspective, they're talking threat there. So let me add that. The threat imposed, right, in this case to increase the risk, is measured in terms of capacity losses between an origin and a destination, right? Now, we know anything can happen from a logistical perspective when you go from point A to point B. And the probability of a terrorist attack happening in general in most jurisdictions on any given day, based on data, is usually low. Dare I say that? But the threat, right, is always present, and the propensity will probably, historically,